Once again, a warm welcome to all of you to this webinar, The Role of LPG in Africa's Energy Transition. My name is Arne Doornebal. I'm the Community Manager of the Netherlands African Business Council. Some people see LPG as yet another fossil fuel which we need to get rid of as quickly as possible, while others see a lot of benefits, a lot of potentials, a lot of opportunities for it. However, today it's not a political debate. It's actually, we're looking at LPG from a business angle, and we're also joined by one of the most renowned gas experts in the Netherlands from the TNO Institute, Mr. René Peters, who will join us shortly. He had very limited availability today, so he will come in, say a few words, and then again also leave us. For a lot of customers in the Netherlands, LPG isn't that well known. It's mostly known for its use in cars, of course, autogas, although that seems to be fading out. It's not like it was in the 90s and 80s. And then the use of cooking is not also really needed here, since we're all connected to the grid. Well, in Africa, that's different. I remember vividly when I lived in Africa, in Uganda. Just as you're trying to cook, the gas is finished and you have to, find a motorcycle taxi and then go with your empty gas bottle to the nearest gas station to fill it again, and then to come back half an hour later with a heavy new LPG, tank, so you can continue cooking your dinner. In Africa, as I said, LPG is an entirely different phase for that. So we have a speaker from Nigeria, Mr. Ekundayo. We have, I see Mr. Peters has already joined us in the meanwhile. Very much welcome to you as well. We have Mr. Volko de Jong speaking to us later, but we start with Mr. Omar Abdallah. He is the General Coordination Officer of Euro LPG. That's a Dutch LPG company, and it's mainly active in Africa. Mr. Abdallah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arne. I appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective on the matter. First of all, when we are talking of the role of LPG in Africa's energy transition, we need to understand transition from where to where. Where do we want to go? And how is the current position? How is the current situation? And where do we want to go? I believe, or we believe, that the main objective, it is first of all access to energy, secondly access to clean and sustainable energy. However, to achieve that, we need to have a realistic understanding of the current situation. Let me just share my screen. When we are talking of the current situation in Africa, we need to realize that in the 21st century, in 21, people in Sub-Saharan Africa do not, for almost 83%, do not have access to clean cooking energy. This is it is not understandable in this time around. Of course, we need to also consider there is differences between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. For the purpose of this meeting, we talk more about Sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to realize that almost 1 billion people are relying on primitive cooking fuels, firewood, charcoal, paraffin, kerosene for their daily cooking needs. And the fact of the matter is that we need to understand that energy in general, it stands at the center of development, it stands at the center of civilization. But human energy can only bring you so far. You need actual energy to do something, be it for your cooking as your daily basic need, because if you are all your day wasted on trying to find firewood, charcoal, and hustling with it, then where do you find time for studying, find time for income generation, find time for other useful activities? Along with this, we can see a destructive chain of negative impacts, from health impacts that almost 2 million deaths per year as a result of indoor air pollution, of cooking with firewood and charcoal. We are talking of deforestation, We are talking of CO2 emissions. We are talking of in fact, the stability of a country's itself. Because if you look at, for example, the Sahel region, where we are seeing conflicts between nomads, we are seeing conflicts between tribes as a result of climate change, result of desertification, result of loss of grazing lands, result of loss of agricultural lands. So in essence, it's a very basic problem. It's a problem that is much, unfortunately, ignored, but it stands at the center of many of the crises and problems in Sub-Saharan Africa and even globally. So that is on cooking energy. Same goes with electricity. Africa at the moment, or Sub-Saharan Africa, only about 54% of the population has access to electricity. This translates to almost 570 million people lacking access to electricity. And we need to imagine ourselves, if we don't have electricity, how do we, from a very basic perspective, how do we study? How do we learn? And from an industrial commercial perspective, how do you run a factory? How do you set up an industrial? You are forced to get expensive, dirty, by the way, diesel generators. Your diesel gets stolen for 10%. And how do you able to manufacture at a profitable and also in a clean manner? So again, human energy stands at the center of development and civilization. But without actual energy, be it for cooking, be it for electricity and other forms of energy, it is human energy can bring you only so far. In our perspective, LPG, it is part of the main solution. Because to understand this is that we need to understand how is LPG produced first of all. LPG is produced as a byproduct of the oil refining, gas extraction, gas processing. In the Netherlands, we have the premiere of having the first bio-LPG refinery in the world, in Rotterdam. So that brings us closer to that shows us LPG, it is not only part of the transition, it is part of the destination, because by investing in LPG infrastructure, LPG adoption, and all what goes around it, it means you are setting a very long-term basis. Once bio-LPG, it becomes more affordable, more scalable, and more able to duplicate it in multiple places. But here in Rotterdam, we already have the first bio-LPG refinery producing at commercial quantities. So once you are adopting to LPG, you are instantly addressing many of the negative impacts. You are preventing deforestation, you are preventing black carbon emitters from entering the sky, you are stopping people, especially the most vulnerable, women and children, to inhale all sorts of pollution from a firewood and charcoal and paraffin. You are giving them the time, the opportunity to actually do something useful, rather than to look around for a firewood and charcoal and all these things and wasting their time. Even we have seen cases that people, they are spending their whole day just to able to get some energy to cook. And you know, we as Europeans that we are living in very comfort, we need to get out of our bubble. You know, because here we are talking of a luxury situation. Are we going for gas? Are we going for solar? Are we going for induction cooking? What are we going for? Unfortunately, we don't have this luxury in Africa. People need to cook. They need to use energy. They need to. Because you can tell an African mother or a father, please, sir, the way you are cooking is bad for your health. The way you are cooking is bad for the environment and climate. They will tell you, look, dying of hunger is also bad for my health. So what is here the priority? So LPG, it is part of the main solution. And by adopting LPG, that we are targeting many of the main United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. From different aspects, from health, again, climate, development, infrastructure, employment, many, many, many aspects. The beautiful thing about LPG is that LPG is a fuel or an energy source that grows with an income. So if you are from the poor income, you start with a small, simple LPG cooker with direct pit top. On top that we here see it in the campings and whatnot. Once you are making some more money, you go for a more luxurious set, 2-pit stove, 3-pit stove. Once you are making more money, it means you are going for the high-end 4-top burners, oven, heater, water heater, fireplace, and whatnot. And moreover, is that by having this kind of infrastructure and distribution access in place, it means that you have put the basis for other applications of LPG, auto gas, electricity, power generation, industrial use, commercial use, bakeries, name it. LPG has many, many useful applications. So if we're here sincere about climate change, about the environmental goals, we need to start seeing LPG as a partner in all this, because it is the cleaner, available, practical, accessible alternative. Africa and the world, for that matter, it doesn't have time to wait for 10 years or 20 years till some new technology comes out from the movies that you have a very small energy source powering cities. No, we have to make use of what we got. And currently, LPG, it is available in excess. If you are looking at Africa's map, you'll find Africa is producing LPG. It has a number of LPG sources. It is surrounded by LPG producers. So what is left? Before I go on to the next slide, is that if you hear my perspective, it might cause you to think that, okay, if this is the case, then what's the problem? What are we waiting for? Unfortunately, as many things in life and the world, it is not always that simple, because for LPG to develop in a country, in a region, it is required some certain factors. However, my mentor, he always taught me, he said, and it's a very cliche saying, that don't invent the wheel has already been invented. Start where the other has ended. And if you put this in perspective related to LPG, you can find many successful case stories around the world. Brazil, India, China, Indonesia. I always like to cite the example of Indonesia, that in a relatively short time, able to provide access to LPG as a clean cooking fuel to a big part of their population. Now you need to imagine Indonesia is a country that you are faced with mountains, earthquake, active volcano, oceans, sea. So you can imagine the difficulty of your supply and distribution chain, but they're able to manage it. What I'm trying to say is that in this case in LPG, there is many successful case stories. So we need to simply adapt, use this experience, what has been gained around the world, in Europe, in Asia, in different places, and we have to pick and match what is suitable for Africa, because we are talking of Africa like it's one country, but Africa is huge. Within Sub-Saharan Africa, there's many differences between the countries. So every country has its own situation and the right factors, how to develop LPG, the LPG sector in the most successful manner. But in general, the factors and the lack thereof as the cause of the LPG sector not being fully developed, first of all, it is regulatory infrastructure and framework. So what do I mean by regulatory infrastructure? We are talking of fiscal policies like subsidies, VAT, duties, taxes on LPG itself as a fuel, on the equipment, on the investment, investor incentives. We can talk about an organized sector, which Nigeria is a nice example of it. They have not one, but they have two or multiple LPG and gas associations. We are talking about standards, safety standards that to guarantee the safety of the people, because LPG, it is a hazardous goods if not handled in the correct manner. Then we are talking of the LPG distribution chain. You need to be there. What is the beautiful thing about LPG is that it is practical and scalable in a sense that you don't need this complete step 1 to step 7 distribution chain. You can skip a few steps. We are finding countries in Africa where they are simply refilling LPG cylinders in one country, transporting them to another and selling them. Yes, it's very expensive, but if there is no alternative, what to do? So it doesn't need to have this step 1 to 7, but ideally you have this from step 4, the distribution, the terminals, to have your terminals to receive the gas in bulk from wherever, be it from domestic production or be it from importation onwards to inland LPG depots, close as possible to the people, close as possible to the population centers. Then you have smaller LPG refilling stations as close to the people. One thing that is differentiate Africa's LPG supply chain is that what we are used to here in Europe is that you have a central LPG facility with a high-speed carousel filling how many cylinders per hour, distributing them onwards to the different cities, and then exchanging full cylinder against empty cylinder. This in most countries in Africa, with exceptions, of course, it is not always workable. Because first of all, people are living day by day. They cannot afford to buy a cylinder at once. Secondly is poor distribution, poor management. So how do you expect them to manage this way? So what happens? You have smaller refilling stations, like your petrol stations, where the people can come, carry their cylinder, fill it, even with their daily, can be 1 kg, 2 kg, whatever their daily income and daily fee.
Omar, sorry to interrupt, but as we said, we have Mr. Peters with us who has to leave in 10 minutes.
Okay, let me round up. Give me 1 minute to round up.
Sure.
So that is on the distribution chain and infrastructure. Then lastly, what I always like to call is a social infrastructure and LPG adoption. LPG, there is some stigma on it that it's dangerous, it's hazardous. So obviously awareness is very important, how to use it in the correct way, and more so important, how to adopt LPG to give people the cylinders in a soft manner, accessible manner, that they can cook the appliances, so the cylinder plus the appliances, microgrids, and so on. Thank you very much. I would like to bring the conclusion home is that LPG is not only part, LPG and gas in general, it is not only the part of the journey, it is not only the part of the transition, it is part of the destination, and it is there to stay for what we believe a very long term. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omar Abdallah of your LPG, and you will still be there for the Q&A. Let's quickly go to Mr. René Peters, who has another appointment at 11. Thank you for being with us today as the main gas expert, one of the main gas experts in the Netherlands, attached to Research Institute TNO, where he's the business director of gas technology. Mr. Peters, having heard of this, passionate plea for the use of LPG, I would use it. You as a scientist, do you share the vision of Mr. Abdallah on LPG?
Yeah, well, first of all, welcome and thanks for the invitation. I think we had a great plea for LPG from Mr. Abdallah, and indeed LPG has a great value, especially for Africa, I think. Maybe first small introduction from my side. I'm within TNO working on gas technology, so how we can use gas, produce gas, distribute gas, but also clean the gas in the sense that we can make it less climate impacting, and how we can support the industries to decarbonize in view of the long-term Paris Agreement ambitions towards 2050 to be zero carbon energy globally to minimize the climate change, as we all know. But it's a trajectory which does not mean we will stop today from oil and gas and tomorrow we'll go all for zero emission fuels. It is a transition path, as we all know, and this transition path will not go equally fast in every region in the world, in every sector, or in every company. And that means that every region and every path will go through a different timeline in this transition. And this transition, as I said, is not just going from pure fossil to zero emission in the end, completely green, but there's also intermediate steps which are quite valuable in realizing the targets. And LPG can be one of them, especially I think in the region of Africa, where indeed the first challenge is to get access to energy for many people, and to get access to energy which is less polluting and less impacting on the environment. And I'm not only talking about CO2 emissions, which is clearly much more beneficial with LPG than it would be with wood or with charcoal, as is currently used, but it's also much less polluting in the sense of air quality. And that is not mentioned many times. We're often only talking about emissions. But I think for people cooking on wood or on charcoal, also air pollution or air quality and health impacts of that are of prime importance. And we all know that using gas is a much cleaner way of burning and creating energy and heat. So in the transition from fossil to clean energy, I think solutions which are more bio-based or which have a lower CO2 footprint could help a lot to move us in the right direction. And even in Europe, TNO is looking mostly in energy transition and supporting industries to convert to low carbon energy sources in Europe. We also see differences in speed and in challenges around the region. Now, the Netherlands, of course, has been a gas country for many years, many decades. So we have a vast distributed network for gas, for heating and for power generation and for industry. And so for us, the challenge towards a low carbon energy is moving away from gas and going towards more electricity, offshore wind, geothermal, maybe electric driving. But if you look even to the countries around us, for example, Germany, a lot of people are still heating their houses on fuel oil, as we know, and power generation is based on coal. And if we move a little bit further away towards Poland, I mean, the majority of the power generation is based on brown coal or lignite. So one of the big steps you can make in this transition initially is just a fuel switch going from coal and oil-based energy sources towards gas-based sources. Could be natural gas, could be methane, could be LPG, which can save you already half of the CO2 emissions and create a clean energy and a clean air system. And I think similarly, as many countries in Europe, this could also hold for Africa, where now the majority of the energy sources are either wood-based or charcoal-based, at least for heating and cooking. And switching to gas-based like LPG is a great way to reduce emissions and clean the air, but also make sure that deforestation will not impact the region too much. So I think in this transition path, LPG could play a major role. And of course, you should have in mind what is the next step and the long-term ambition, because it was already mentioned that also bio-LPG is an option to go to a more greener form of LPG as a byproduct of biodiesel production, which indeed is already taking place in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, but could also be developed on a larger scale. And on the longer term, which is, then we're really talking a few decades ahead, is working towards synthetic fuels. That's what TNO as a technology organization is also looking at with a lot of oil majors, for example. How can we develop based on green hydrogen and CO2 synthetic fuels that could be pure hydrogen. That's the easiest one, but it's difficult to distribute and to store for local communities, especially in Africa, I think. But you can think of derived products like DME, dimethyl ether, or methanol, or even methane, which could be synthesized and then be produced in a clean way or a circular way to provide energy in the future in a clean and non-impacting way.
All right.
Long-term challenge, but I think LPG as an intermediate solution is really a valuable first step towards decarbonization for Africa.
Thank you. So if you still have a few minutes for a last question. Yeah. That's very insightful indeed. And if you look at it from an investment perspective, because you already mentioned that we've been having it for decades. We saw the 7 steps from before you have it. I mean, it's also quite a lot of investment required to actually get to that level. Is it still worth it, in your view, to make those investments in African countries?
Yeah, well, definitely I think so, because this transition will take at least three decades from now. We're targeting 2050 to be in a net zero emission system globally. Of course, the developed countries and regions like Europe, America will take the lead, and maybe Australia. And of course, the developing countries will be slower, but moving from coal and oil to gas is definitely already a big step. And that step will give a good business for at least the next decade, and maybe even more, maybe even the next 2 decades. I think you should have in mind as an investor, what is the longer term perspective? So what after LPG, what is the next step in the decarbonization and in the local supply of energy? Because I think for electricity, of course, local solutions like solar panels and wind can provide clean energy for lighting and maybe even partly for cooking as well on the long term, if you can combine it with a good storage option on batteries. I mentioned the bio LPG line, so more bio-based. Well, we're working also a lot in India, of course, for example, to develop biogas production from biomass and manure as a local community solution for clean energy for cooking. So that could, in local cases, also be a long-term clean solution as an alternative for LPG. And I mentioned DME, which could be a good option also to replace LPG on the long term for local communities and local distribution. So I think as an investor, you should not only think of the LPG case for the next decade or a little bit more, but also look at what's the next step beyond that. Will it be the bio LPG? Will it be other liquid carrier like DME or methanol or other solutions or synthetic fuels, which can bring Africa and the communities to the next step. And then, of course, the whole supply chain, the whole logistics, that is very important. What can you reuse from these supply chains in the long-term zero emission energy carriers, which are beyond the LPG solutions? I think that's important to have in mind as an investor if you're setting up this whole logistic chain and this whole business. So that would be my advice.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. René Peters, Business Director of Gas Technology at TNO. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much and good luck.
Cheers. So now we're going to be zooming in rather than in the entire continent to one particular African country, largest economy, which is in Nigeria. And therefore, I'm glad we're joined by Mr. Felix Ekundayo. He's the Managing Director of the Asiko Energy and Gas Terminaling. They're active in LPG distribution and also in gas to power. And on top of that, he's also the Deputy President of the Nigerian LP Gas Association. Mr. Ekundayo, welcome to this webinar.
It's Doornebal. Thank you for having me on board, and it's my pleasure to be here. So my name is Felix Ekundayo, and basically we run a group of companies that deal with LPG in Nigeria. I'm glad you made the distinction in terms of going to a focused discussion, So generally talking about what's happening in Europe, continental-wise, what's happening in Sub-Saharan Africa, continental-wise, but within the subcontinent, so to speak, or the Sub-Saharan African perspective, the stories are actually very different. So if you're looking at what's happening in West Africa, it's very different to what's happening in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, the rest is very different to what's happening in Southern Africa. But as a whole, in terms of in the tropical parts of the country, of the world, the development needs to be thought of slightly differently. I like the comments made by René Peters before he left in terms of some of the options. I think often when we talk about energy transition and development in Africa, and particularly the more populous countries like Nigeria, we are sometimes the conversation is a little bit myopic in terms of it's just focused on renewable. So you see investments wanting to be targeted towards solar, towards wind, and so on. But a part of the conversation that's often missed is the fact that it also needs to be very sustainable. So many of these investments past 1 year, past 2 years, don't actually survive that period. So it has to be sustainable. So if we're going to be talking about renewable in future, we must be talking about biogases and so on. Omar Abdullah's presentation hit the nail on the head in terms of, look, it's much more about energy poverty here, and it impedes development. So energy poverty in terms of maybe it's access to clean cooking, maybe it's time wasted in gathering energy for cooking. Before then, we start to talk about, okay, moving on along the sustainable development goals, you go from the cooking basic energy requirements for food for sustenance, you go into the requirement for, I won't call it a high level of fuel, but of energy requirement. We're talking auto gas, we're talking gas into power. So that transition for us here really cannot only happen with a fuel that has both density of energy, which LPG has, and is easily transportable, which again LPG has. It's very difficult in these parts to develop the scale of the continent. I think many people overlook. The distances are huge, so it's very difficult to develop pipelines. It's very difficult to develop infrastructure that will carry very minute quantities of gas. So you've got the distance challenge. Then you've also got the requirement, the demand challenge. When I say the demand challenge, in Europe, in temperate countries, you have a base load that is not cooking. You have a base load that is actually central heating. Okay. That base load is what actually sustains infrastructure development, because you've got your central heating 70% of the time. It provides the revenue to amortize your distribution network. Here, we don't have the requirement for heating, so you don't have the base load, and therefore you can't develop a very expensive bit of infrastructure for 2 peaks in a day, mostly breakfast and dinner. So therefore, it creates a challenge which LPG is particularly suited to. It's very dense, it's clean, it's portable. So that works for us here. It is for this reason that you now find, I mean, that not just our company, but the industry as a whole, we have what is, in our view, the fastest growing LPG market in the world, in double-digit growth for the last minimum 10 years. Now, in terms of absolute numbers, it is not, we're not in tens of millions yet, but we broke the 1 million ton barrier last year, and we're already 20% ahead of last year's growth. So those are interesting numbers. Those are encouraging numbers from our perspective. I will stop there for now if there are other questions.
Thank you. I almost don't have to ask any follow-up questions anymore, as you already ticked some of the ones I was going to. But I say it's growing rapidly there in Nigeria. Maybe you can also say a few words about, you know, how percentage-wise how big the sector is at the moment if you look at the total energy demand. And I was wondering, how can foreign companies play a role in further developing this sector?
Okay. In terms of the percentage LPG plays in the energy sector, because The information on biomass is in there. I will talk about liquid fuels generally. We estimate the liquid fuels markets anywhere between 25 to 30 million tons. As of today, LPG is now about 1.2 million tons a year. So it's a rough, maybe 4 or 5% of that demand, but it is going to take a bigger chunk of it. The government in its gas policy, which we were instrumental in developing as a company and as the Nigeria LP Gas Association, of which, as you mentioned, I'm the deputy president, we put in a lot of effort into developing policy, into developing standards that are world-class, so that when we now transition to being able to the current phase of using gas for auto, gas for power, we are doing so in a safe manner, okay? So we expect that percentage to hit double digits, maybe not, how should we say, maybe not now, but at least within the next 10 years, with all the other developmental plans that are there for LPG, industrial power, auto. Sorry, remind me again what your second, what can foreign companies do?
Exactly.
Foreign companies, in the sense, we have some structural challenges which make it difficult for there's a lot of interest in coming in to build infrastructure because they can see the growth, but you have the challenges associated with fiscal policy, right? So where you don't have a defined exchange rate mechanism, right? There's a challenge. I can bring my money in, but can I take my money out? Okay, so those are conversations that we always have when it comes down to foreign companies, foreign investors rather. There are how should we say, ways you can mitigate that risk. So if the investment were to come in, you don't necessarily have to, dip into the investment. You can just securitize the investment. So there are ways and means around that have been explored and that have been used successfully. But the sector, the industry, the energy sector here cannot grow without foreign direct investment. That's a clear requirement. So there is going to have to be structural changes to the regulatory environment, as well as to the investment environment, the challenge of doing business here.
Exactly. Thank you. And maybe just to make it more concrete, I understand you and your LPG, you also have corporations. I mean, how does it work, the interaction between the local companies in Nigeria and then the foreign companies from Europe?
I mean, it's on several levels. If it's the distributorship arrangements, there are people wanting to sell equipment into Nigeria, but there are those that have physical presence because they believe and they understand that there isn't that kind of scope for growth anywhere else in the world at the moment. And most other places, LPG is actually in decline because it's being eaten into by natural gas, it's been eaten into by electricity. So in Nigeria, those are still maybe 1 or 2 steps along the line, or they will develop in parallel. So they're not actually seen as competing fuels at the moment. They're complementary fuels in the development of the region. Now, Omar's presentation spoke about 900 and something million people. That's a lot of growth yet to come, right? As economic development happens, that's a significant level of growth yet to come. So we're optimistic. Exactly.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Ekundayo. Please stay on the line. After our next and final speaker, there is still some time for Q&A. So the next speaker is from the Netherlands, Mr. Volko de Jong. He's the managing director of GGNI, and he's been very active in several African countries in LPG. Mr. de Jong, could you kindly tell us a little bit more, after unmuting yourself, about your company, please? Please unmute first, Volko. There you are.
Is this better?
Yes, this is
there
much
you
better.
go. This is much better. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm Volko de Jong. I've been involved not only in GGNI, but actually I started early 2000 in building the Energy Delta Institute. That's a business school for natural gas and energy. And we have been working a lot in many countries, also in Africa, but also in Mexico and in Latin America, but also in Tanzania and in Egypt and other countries in Africa. So after these speakers, I think Omar introduced very well what's going on in the market, and I think I fully agree with him. It's an essential step in the development of Africa to develop LPG, and you have to recognize that of course the strategy in this country is fully depending on insight on what's happening there, and you cannot even compare it with what's happening, for example, in a country like the Netherlands. So what we do in our company is still we have a lot of knowledge in the Netherlands because, of course, we have been producing gas for more than 60 years. We found the Groningen field, which was at that moment in time one of the biggest gas fields in the world. And all this technology and knowledge in service companies and also in a company like GGNI, who's doing the transition in the Netherlands, Dutch gas company, could be used to assist countries in Africa. And actually, that's what the task is of GGNI. It was originally started by the Dutch GGNI to assist countries where gas plays a role in the energy mix with the knowledge that is available in our country. And that is clear that, of course, our position now is after I think maybe 60 years that we look differently at gas because we found 2.7 trillion cubic meters of gas in the ground. Actually, it was so big, this gas field, we didn't even know that there was so much, and we could produce for 60 years. Yeah, but that is now for the gas countries in Africa, you have a completely different game. I'm involved, for example, in Egypt, where they still are importing. They found a lot of natural gas, but LPG, there's still a lot of import going on. So countries like Egypt and many other countries in Africa, they will need to find ways to produce LPG themselves and set up this network. And then, for example, there we assist in building infrastructure to produce LPG from the existing gas fields. And a nice example there is you talk about gas fields in a remote area. If you can produce LPG in a remote area, you don't have to transport it. In the case of Egypt, you don't even have to import it. You don't have to subsidize it. So there's a big win in getting such a project up and running. But then, of course, in the cooperation between the Netherlands and Africa, something special happens. Whereas in the old days, you could easily go to the Dutch government and say, I want to set up a pilot project. Can you assist in building an LPG plant in Egypt? Now suddenly you're faced with a country here that is almost obsessed with getting natural gas out of the way. And they say, we don't assist anymore in knowledge, bringing knowledge to, say, Egypt or any other country in the world. So actually GGNI had the task, and sometimes the CEO of GGNI said, just call Volko, maybe he can assist you, because officially we as a Dutch GGNI are not allowed to do so. So that is crazy, because this knowledge could help to make the infrastructure more efficient, like what we do in producing LPG in Africa, but many other areas in the energy sector we could assist. But we must accept that all these countries have their own view, their own stakeholders, their own targets, which are different for us, even their own culture. And we have to align with it. And for example, in LPG, we are looking for ways, I think Felix mentioned this already, how do you get people interested in investment? Well, that's another typical difficult question. So if I ask to an investor in the Netherlands in general, I have this beautiful plants in Egypt, and now we have one, and we can maybe set up 100, then a lot of risk is in these, in the perception of the investor. Say, well, it's nice, but I'm not able, like Felix said, get my money out of there. I cannot manage it. I cannot handle it. So there's a big hesitation in both support from the government side and from the investor side, because they don't oversee what they are starting in such a project. Yeah, so this is something that we have been working on in many cases, because the knowledge is very big. It's not only LPG production, but for example, the Netherlands for many years was a leading trading, it still is a leading trading facility. The TTF is a famous spot in Europe. That's the place where all the gas trading takes place. And this knowledge could be brought to areas like Egypt, where you say, actually, you should start do some trading as well. And all other facilities, like also mixing it up with hydrogen, etc. All this technology could be there, but then we should talk with the African countries and see how we can assist it, and also talk with the Dutch government to get more support than we get right now. Yeah, so that is for us very important. And then I go back a little to this LPG in Egypt. And in 2018, they had to import 360 million cylinders of LPG. Be aware that the government subsidizes these LPG cylinders because the price on the world market is much too high for a general person in Egypt, even though Egypt is one of the more wealthy countries in Africa. So if you want to do this and you find ways to unlock the LPG potential in Africa, that is a huge advantage for a country like Egypt, because you lose the subsidy, you even produce yourself, you can align it with some infrastructure that you're building. I think Felix at a certain moment mentioned we only have heating. As a lecturer in these business schools said, no, Felix, that's not true. The big base load in the Netherlands of gas is the industry. That's the base load, and the heating is only in winter. So we have a peak in our gas supply, of course, in winter, because the heating is needed. But in the end, a lot of industry needs LPG or any form of natural gas as well. Yeah, but doing this, we love to talk with the countries, really looking what are the stakeholders of there, and also find ways to have transition of this knowledge to the African countries. In the case of LPG, for example, we discussed we should, in the beginning, produce this equipment, this LPG installation in the Netherlands. We put it in a container and bring it to Egypt. But within 10 of these projects, we should bring almost 90% of production to local content in the country. Simply, the Dutch labor force is too expensive, and it helps the countries in Africa really to get grip on these projects. So we also say, no, we should migrate. We know we have to do that. So we shouldn't be able just to build a factory and say in the classical way, we want to be the owner. We are also open for strong energy knowledge transition to these countries and assist in that, and strong ownership of the countries themselves, which I think is crucial in this country. If it's not owned by the countries themselves, or at least with entrepreneurs in the country, you become much too dependent on foreign investment again.
Exactly, Mr.
Yeah,
I was just going to ask that, sorry to interrupt you, but if it's difficult indeed to find foreign investment and also foreign governments to step in, isn't that then something that there's maybe more need of looking at the local market and where the countries themselves can invest? Of course,
you're forced to do that. So we are always looking for local partners, local investors and they are available, but you have to find your way, which is for a Dutchman difficult. Every country, that's even true for Germany and Belgium, if you're a Dutchman, has its own network, has its own specialties to find the right players in this market.
Exactly. Thank you for that.
So we need a partner. We
need partners. Thank you for that.
So we have a partner, for example, in Egypt, and that's essential as well. Only if you have such a partner, you can really deliver this knowledge to the countries.
All right, thank you for that. So for now, we don't have questions coming in from the participants yet, but if you do please use the chat and we can address the question. But in the meanwhile, I thought maybe I can have the other two speakers briefly comment on this matter, on the investment. Maybe Mr. Abdallah, you being based in the Netherlands, knowing both Africa and and Europe, of course. How do you deal with that? How do you look at investment, and are there still parties that are willing to invest in LPG solutions?
From our perspective, and I think Volko he hit this point as well, Mr. Ekundayo. When it's about investment in African countries, and again, every country in Africa, it's different. Even within a country like Nigeria, talking of a country with multiple different tribes. But what we believe in general, it is always essential in doing business in Africa, it is finding the right local partners that have the right capability, and most importantly, it is trustworthy. You can try to be a Dutch cowboy or an American cowboy and wanting to do everything by yourself, manage everything by yourself, but the rest
No way.
You will bump into so many walls, and you'll probably get a resistance from the local community, local governments, local regulatory, and whatsoever. You need to come in this business together with a local partner. That is partnerships. I believe it is the key to succeed in investing in this business and doing business in Africa in general.
Exactly. Thank you. Mr. Ekundayo, how do you look at the investment question? I mean, aren't there so many other countries, think of China, etc., that are more than willing to step in if the West comes with, their regular list of terms and conditions for financing?
You will think that I have looked at Omar's exam question sheet, because I'm going to answer in the same way that he answered. Really, the most important aspect of dealing as in any country, let's not say it's Africa, let's not say it's Nigeria or anything like that. The most important aspects of dealing in any country are two things. One is trust. Some famous book says the speed of trust. Without trust, things take a long time because you have a protracted due diligence process. So what might be a week discussion with somebody you trust will take 3 years because you're going around doing your due diligence. So it's building up that trust, the transparency in terms of operations, the openness in terms of sharing information and so on. That's very important. Secondly, it's also not coming with preconceived ideas of how to execute, right? What might work in Germany or the Netherlands or Canada, Mexico, whatever. The markets don't work in the same way. So there are unique aspects to each country. We understand Nigeria, we understand Ghana to an extent, but we wouldn't say that we understand West African, all the energy markets in West Africa, let alone East Africa, let alone North Africa. So there are unique flavors to each location. So essentially, come with an open mind and look for a partner that has track record and is trustworthy.
Exactly. That's great. That's great advice there. Mr. Abdallah, I think we're approaching the end of this webinar. Since this webinar was basically set up as your idea. I mean, you've been an NABC member for a long time, and you said, hey, why is there so relatively little content about LPG? Why don't we make a webinar together? I'm very happy you came with that idea. Maybe you can give us some nice closing remarks before we wind up.
As a closing remark, I would say that, look, we as a companies, be it European companies, African companies, governments from Europe, from Africa, developmental organizations, NGOs, institutions, multilateral organizations, if we are starting to look at this matter from all its different angles, access to energy, energy poverty, health, deforestation, prevention of deforestation, we need to look at it as an integrated problem that is all interlinked to each other. And the faster that we come to a mutual understanding of how LPG and gas in general is playing an important role to address all these problems and its impacts. I believe the faster we can achieve a future that has everybody having access to clean energy, and we don't need to face these problems that we are talking about. In Dutch, we have a very simple saying that don't mop while the tap is open. And if you are talking of all the climate prevention here we have a system called carbon credits that is invested in reforestation. But if you, on the other hand, don't stop deforestation, then what is the point of reforestation? If you don't stop emission of black carbon emitters in the air, then what are we talking about of other CO2? We call it here climate neutralization. So it is, we can consider it is just a formality. We can call it white savior complex. We can call it neocolonialism. We need to come together. We need to treat it as it is. It is a crisis. It is a crisis. Unfortunately, it has been ignored. Maybe it is ignored for whatsoever reason, because people cannot comprehend that people every day, they have to look for their firewood and charcoal and kerosene and paraffin to cook. Maybe people cannot comprehend. Maybe it's not a spectacular problem. Maybe it's not an attractive problem, but it is a crisis that hits us at all levels of society. And it needs to be addressed as such. That's, I think, my closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdallah of EuroLPG. Also, big thank you to the other participants, Mr. De Jong and Mr. Ekundayo. We've reached the end of this webinar. I'd like to remind you that next week there are 2 webinars of the Netherlands African Business Council, totally different subjects. They're both about poultry. If you're interested, please join them. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter through nabc.nl or follow us on the social media on Twitter. Maybe a bit difficult from Nigeria at the moment, but you know, from the other areas, you know, follow what we're doing. And if you're interested in getting in touch with us, see what we can do for you. Also, don't hesitate to reach out to the NABC or to myself. That's all for today. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful rest of today. Bye.